Well, good evening, everyone. That's my secret weapon tonight, my bell. Okay. Well, good evening and an extremely warm welcome to Dorset Humanists. In the event of an emergency, the main exit is at the back of the hall there that goes straight into the car park. If there's any problem that way, there's also quite a challenging stairwell just up here. You have to get through the window, etc., etc. But just to let you know, there is another exit there if we need it. Toilets are in the corridor. And tonight's meeting will end promptly at midnight.
Which day?
Okay, no. Normally we finish at 9:15. I'm going to, special dispensation this evening, I'm going to just take it forward a little bit to 9:30. Okay, so just so that you know, and we will definitely finish at 9:30, no matter what we happen to be discussing at 9:29. But we don't chuck you out, so please do linger and chat. We'll be having a mock vote tonight, so if you want to know the instant result, please hang around for the count. We're expecting the results round about 3 a.m. No, I don't know how long it's going to. But Aaron tells me it's not going to take very long. So if you'd like to know the official result, just at the end, we will have a hand show as well, like they do on Question Time. I'm not going to even count, but just sort of volume of hands that go up for each party will just give us a bit of a clue. Okay, very briefly, some notices. Our next social evening is Thursday the 2nd of April at Moon in the Square. If you're interested in our social night, see Dean, who's the tall, handsome man at the back in the check shirt. He didn't know I was talking to him. Yeah, he's waving now. Our next walk is on Sunday the 5th of April, and if you're interested in walking and talking, see Aaron or meet up for details. Our next main meeting is on Saturday the 11th of April at Moordown Community Centre, and we're very excited to be able to welcome the Chief Executive of the National Secular Society on coming to speak to us. So please do pick up a programme as you leave with all the details about that, and lots more information about humanism and Dorset Humanists on the table. Entry to our meetings is free, but there's a colourful bowl by the door, so do please leave a small donation of around £2 to help with our expenses if you can. Well, tonight is a very special event for us, and we're delighted to welcome our panellists this evening. The purpose of the exercise is to find out which party humanists should vote for. Now, in case you're unsure what humanism is, our strapline should give you a clue. It's atheists and agnostics for a better world. Or to reduce it to a 3-word soundbite, and you can get a badge with these 3 words on if you like, good without God. We're not always that keen on that particular slogan, but we've got some badges if you're interested. So, in other words, we seek the common good without religious beliefs. Interestingly, 30% of people in Bournemouth and Poole ticked no religion in the most recent census, so we are an important voting bloc. Now, some of you may have picked up an indicative checklist of the kind of policy areas we might be discussing tonight. I'll be asking our candidates to give some yes-no answers to the most humanist of these policy points, and you can ask the rest, whichever you think is important from a humanist point of view, or our candidates may well cover those areas. You should also have a voting slip with you, little slip. If you haven't got one of those, pop your hand up and Aaron will make sure you've got a voting slip. And we would be grateful if you would vote and hand that in at the end in our secret ballot. Now we're going to have to stick to some strict rules. The candidates each have an initial 10-minute slot to give us their pitch, and I'm going to let all of them speak before we get to questions. So please don't interrupt with questions during the first part of the evening. As I said, my secret weapon is the bell. 1 ring means your time is up. 2 rings means your time really is up. And 3 bells, we've got some bouncers to eject you. And this goes for the audience as well. So please ask succinct questions and candidates please give succinct answers. So let me introduce our panel tonight. I'm going to do them in the list in which they appear on my sheet, first of all. So Kim Fendley is a parliamentary candidate for the North Dorset Labour Party. Mike Plummer is parliamentary candidate for the Bournemouth West Liberal Democrats. Lizzie McManus is parliamentary candidate for the Bournemouth West Green Party. And Martin Holden is parliamentary candidate for Bournemouth West UKIP. And Blair Crawford, last but not least, is Conservative councillor with overall responsibility for adult social care in Bournemouth. Will you please give a big welcome to them all? So in no particular order, I'm going to ask Kim if he will go first. Kim, thank you.
Is that all right? Am I too close or too far? That's right. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for the invite as well for the Dorset Humanists. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself first before I then launch into the gump about Labour, etc., and things like that. Just so you're not, you get a little bit of personal story behind it as well. It's always quite exciting. So my name is Kim Fendley. I grew up in Dorset. I went to the Blandford School. My parents are both physics teachers, or they prefer physicists, which means that I didn't really get the chance to get indoctrinated early on. So I kind of missed that whole thing that a lot of children do end up going through. But that's not to say, that they didn't try and, see if I wanted to do other things, etc., anything like that. Every Sunday they'd send me to the local village Sunday school for a couple of hours, and when I came back home, they were always, quite. They seemed much happier. So, they're obviously very keen that I was doing that. There we go. Good. Well done. Keep up. So I'm a teacher over at Parkstone Grammar School, and so I get a chance to work with children, so basically young adults every day, which is a massive privilege for me, and to get to see so many different faiths there as well, which is fantastic. It's a non-denominational school. It's purely academic sometimes. And so it really is excellent to see so many, basically how young people can really just get over their differences and celebrate their similarities and the friendships that they can develop in that sense. And I think with that in mind, that's all what kind of humanism is about, forgetting the religious aspect of it and really rather concentrating on the human side of our relationships. Labour, I have to say, when looking at the yes/no questions, does kind of give you a little bit of grey areas, but I can actually give you some yes or no answers that I think might please some of you. Firstly, so let's say, affordable houses or affordable homes, things like that. Labour wants to build 200,000 new homes by 2020. But I think, to be fair, a lot of the parties are promising this as well. So whether it actually goes through, yes, tick that box, tick it. Another thing as well, which I'm actually quite happy with, I think we're the only party doing this, we are going to abolish the House of Lords. We're going to replace it with something called the Senate of the Nations, but we're going to get rid of this idea that we have 26 unelected religious officials sitting and making, legal decisions on our behalf without being elected, which I think we only, this is something we only share with Iran and Saudi Arabia, I think. So obviously great allies to be a part of there. We're also going to, really tackle inequality. We're living at a time now where, I'm sure many of you here will know, there's a big range in the audience, but we're living in a time of massive inequality. The next generation, maybe my generation, not sure, can be included in that. But they're going to have a lower standard of living than the generation that's gone before them, and that is a massive, massive challenge to try and overcome. So, we've got more billionaires than we've never had before. So it annoys me because it's not as if the wealth isn't there; it's just not being distributed fairly. At the moment, our country is the 4th most unequal country in the world in terms of income. which is, a travesty in a way. The only thing that I think that's keeping our society together at the moment are our public services that are getting very, very damaged by the Tories' cuts. So first things first, we are going to raise the minimum wage to £8 by 2020, which should be a little bit higher than inflation by the time it gets to 2020 as well, which is lovely. We're also going to give 25 hours of free childcare to young parents, which is fantastic as well. And we really need to do something to end the kind of food bank crisis. So, one of the richest nations on earth, we have nearly 900,000 people each year using food banks, which again is another atrocious thing. So everything we can do to make sure that more money is in people's pockets and the less they're spending on, social services, etc., is far more important. We're going to repeal the 2012 Affordable Care Act, which is essentially, the privatisation of our NHS. And we're going to get Andy Burnham, in charge, which is going to be a very big difference to, Jeremy Hunt, etc. Someone who actually believes in homeopathy, etc., in charge of the NHS is something I'm not really a big fan of myself. Many of you might be, that's fantastic, but hopefully not in the Humanists. We also, unless you look, a big fan of mining class, etc., we're going to introduce a tax on mansions. Which doesn't go down well in the papers, obviously, because it's a tax on all the houses. It's not the biggest increase, but again, it's another statement that Labour is making that there needs to be a fairly radical redistribution of wealth at the top and to trickle it down. Again, I was looking at compulsory prayer in schools and things like that to give you, this is kind of the grey area. It's something that Labour isn't really tackling in that sense. And it's essentially because most schools don't, this is something they don't follow anyway. About 75% of schools don't follow this, either because they don't have the space or because essentially it is down to the way the school is run. My own personal views, and it's quite a spicy one, I would say, on kind of faith schools. I would rather see that faith schools are taken out of taxpayers' hands. Personally, I don't, especially when I'm applying for jobs and things like that, there are certain jobs I cannot apply for because I don't belong to a particular kind of sect or a particular religion or anything like that, which I think is, quite an unfair society in that sense. They are given a certain amount of power and status in society, which I think is not right for the 21st century. It's a kind of traditionalist opinion that is mostly that we see in, in terms of Church of England, something that is very much a traditionalist-based society. Another situation as well, which I think we need to adopt, is one that, if you look at the current trends, which is the last census, we had about, I think 60% of people saying that they were religious, and about 25% of people saying they were not religious, which is a big increase. It was about a 10% increase, I think, actually, for those saying non-religious. And over the next, by the time of the next census, they expect that to be actually around the 45% mark, which is a massive change in society, having an actual, no religious block as society. And I think we actually do need to do massive inroads in how our infrastructure works, how our politics works, to make sure that actually that reflects our society and our values as a whole. And to say that it's not a Christian society that David Cameron keeps on expunging now, but actually one that values the human being and not the institution. Right, thank you very much.
Kim, can I just check a few things? And you can just give yes, no answers to these. You talked a little bit about faith schools then, but a specific question we would ask is, will Labour Party end religious discrimination in schools, in pupil admissions and recruitment?
No. Maybe. Don't regret.
Okay.
No, very unlikely.
Will the Labour Party include humanism in RE syllabuses?
Yes, when Tristram Hunt is appointed as Secretary of State, they will reevaluate all the syllabuses put forward by Oxford, etc.
And will the Labour Party legalise assisted dying with necessary safeguards?
It is a Labour lord who's trying to push it through at the moment. It's not really something that Ed Miliband actually touches this election. It won't be in the manifesto. But personally, I would really hope it's something that he approaches after the election. And judging by the way that they have 60% of support in the House of Lords now, I really. Oh, thanks. I think sorry about that, guys.
Thanks,
I think it's very likely that it's something they will approach and consider next election. Obviously, with the necessary safeguards, doctors, maybe including a judge, etc. as well.
Okay, that's fine. And will your party legalise humanist marriage as in Scotland?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I'm now going to call upon Mike Plummer to talk to us about the Liberal Democrat policies. Thank you, Mike.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Hopefully I won't break this. What a nice guy. Thank you very much indeed. Hello everybody. Hi, I'm Mike Plummer, the Dem candidate for the general election. I want to possibly approach this differently to how other people are going to approach. In the last general election, 58% of the population of Bournemouth West actually bothered to vote. The majority of people didn't vote. If you ask most people why they don't vote, they turn around and say, well, it makes no difference. They're all the same. Well, I can assure you on one occasion, this guy ain't. I am different. So pin back your ears and I will very quickly explain why. Left school unqualified virtually, started life as a junior circuit trainee sales assistant, started day release evening courses. Within 4 years was doing my first post-grad, within 5 years was lecturing in London. 8 years after I left school, I was a BTEC national coordinator at a big college in Birmingham, decided to jack it all in, life was too easy. Grab a rucksack, disappear off around the world for 3 years. However, unfortunately, 2.5 months out, while travelling up the Amazon, I had a little accident, smashed my wrist, was given 7 days to come home or have amputated gangrene. Came back, did a teaching qualification, started working in industry, I did various other trips around 4 continents. Came back, moved to Ipswich. Since then, I now have 4 postgrads and an MBA. So I moved down here about 20 years ago with my wife and my first daughter. So what have I done for this area? Right, the first thing I found out, when I found out that my daughter started primary school, how little money Dorset's receiving for education. We were the 3rd least funded council in the whole UK. I collected 6,500 signatures, put them in a rucksack and walked 120 miles from Poole to the House of Commons, giving press, radio and TV interviews all the way, getting MPs, MEPs, members of the House of Lords, mayors, ordinary people to walk with me part of the way. 6 weeks later, we got £1.25 million as a one-off payment for education in Dorset. And a few weeks after that, I was awarded the first ever Dorset Education Award from the Dorset County Council. I have run my own charities in Bournemouth and Poole. For a number of years I used to run the Poole Park Challenge to raise money for disabled and disadvantaged children in the area, doing a load of wacky sports and getting various teams in. I've been an LEA governor of a number of local schools and a trustee of a number of local charities. Are you familiar with SWAP, Sheltered Work Opportunities? Up at Northbourne Roundabout, known as the Cherry Tree Nursery. Excellent. I was a trustee with Jessica for a number of years and helped manage to get a education minister down to actually visit them and give them some more support. I've also been a trustee and was a chair of trustees for a number of years with Vita Nova, based in Boscombe, unless it's moved, which basically helps reintroduce people who are suffering from addiction back into society. When I was contacted a few years ago by the Remploy, has anyone heard of Remploy? Disabled factories. There was one based in Alderney, off Alder Road near Sainsbury's. They were going to close it down. I was a local councillor in Poole. I went and visited them. I was the only councillor who unfortunately went and visited them. I was blown away. These guys were incredible. They were producing amazingly high quality products, 60% of which was being exported. However, they're being closed down. So I collected 23,000 signatures from all over the UK, put them in a rucksack, and with a small team of 5 of us, we ran and power walked in 30 hours from the factory to the House of Commons. I knew the only way I could save that factory from closure was to basically get a meeting with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. At that time, it was the Labour government, and there's a guy called John Denham. I have to tell, sorry, the Labour Party may not be aware of this. I did lie. After 3 hours of phoning up, I eventually got the telephone number of the Permanent Private Secretary for the Work and Pensions Minister. Phoned him up, I knew what I was going to say, I knew what he was going to say. Hi, I'd really love to speak to the Minister who were trying to save the factory from closure. Oh, Mike, he'd love to help you. He'd love to meet you, but he's so busy. Don't worry about it. David Cameron's chomping at the bit to come out of the house and collect the petition. Mike, give me 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes, I had him phoning back and I had a meeting in the street with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions in front of LWT television and other media, in which he promised he would do everything to save the factory. The factory remained open for another 6 years. Unfortunately, with the latest tranche of redundancies and closures, it was closed last year. When I found out the Labour Party was coming down to have their conference at the BIC, I was quite angry to find out. I believe the normal is when a political party goes to a conference, it pays £650,000 to cover the policing of that party conference. And I was told that every single Dorset ratepayer would have to pay the remaining £850,000 policing. I got a petition up. I like getting petitions. I contacted the Labour Party and said, oh, by the way, we'll be petitioning and we'll be protesting out for the whole. We're petitioning and protesting out for the whole of your conference. Surprisingly, they coughed up £850,000 and paid for the whole policing. And that saved every single person, because it would have come out of your police, I can't remember the term for it, but it's added to your rates. The police precept, thank you very much. I continue to do things, and I can promise you, if I become the next MP for Bournemouth West, you will have a voice in the House of Commons. And I will rattle the cage, because I believe in getting my hands dirty. Now, I know the word dirty and politician doesn't normally go well in the same sentence, but I will not only go out there and talk the talk, I promise you I will walk the walk. Now, in relation to a number of your questions I've been specifically asked, I will try and rush through them. I'm not so sure of all the parties' feelings on it. End religious selection in school admissions. I don't think we have a policy for that, but I would not approve that. I am a Christian, ladies and gentlemen. I am proud to be a Christian. I have no problems with anyone else with any other religion. I have no problems if you don't have a religion. But I am a Christian, and I will always stand up and say that loudly. So I'm sorry, I could not approve of that. End compulsory Christian worship in schools. As my learned friend from the Labour Party said, I'm not aware of any school, I know a lot of teachers, I'm not aware of any school having prayers or religious services. Possibly at Christmas time for the last service, but it's not done. My wife's a teacher, Glenmore School for Girls. It doesn't happen. Include humanism in GCSE and A-level RE. I can see no reason why we shouldn't, and I would support that all the way. It's important that people should be given the choice. The only way you can get a choice is to give you all the information. Remove bishops from the House of Lords. No, I wouldn't approve that, and I wouldn't vote for that. I believe they have their purpose in there, and I'm sorry that you're disagreeing with me. I'm happy to discuss that afterwards. Legalise assisted dying. I think it's very important. I would totally fight for this. I know it's not Christian, but it's important. My mother died last year. She was in pain, and I prayed that she would die in her sleep. You should not let anyone suffer. You should legalise this. This is important, and I would fight to have it legalised. And last but not least, legalise humanist marriage. Marriage is important. The joining of two people, whether of the same gender or different, is very important. And if two people are prepared to give themselves to each other for the rest of their life, we should glory in that, and we should be proud of that. I would support that all the way. Thank you very much.
Mike, thank you very much for answering those particular questions. So I'm now going to call upon Lizzie McManus, who's going to talk to us about the Green Party. Lizzie.
for inviting me here this evening. My name's Elizabeth McManus, or Lizzie, and I'm standing for the Green Party in Bournemouth West. I think so. Thank you. Although I've always voted in the past, I found that looking forward to the next election, I didn't believe enough in any of the traditional three parties, sorry guys, to vote for them. I'd voted for the Liberal Democrats in the previous election, and like many other Lib Dems voters, I felt completely let down and betrayed by them over the last few years. Not wanting to be labelled another apathetic youth, I researched other political parties, and that's when I met the Green Party. I read their policies, and I thought, this is just common sense. I understand what they're saying, I know what they stand for, and they're all issues that I care about. I've never felt that strong an affiliation with a political party before. Another turning point for me, getting involved in politics at all, has been the startling effects of the current government. I don't think I'm alone in having thought in the past that it doesn't really matter who I vote for or who gets in, because it doesn't really make a difference to me or my life. Well, for the first time in my adult life, it really has made a difference. I was a child during the previous Conservative government and heard the stories about Thatcher, but didn't really mean a huge amount to me. I was too busy playing hopscotch at school. Now I understand what all the fuss is about. Under this government, I have been shocked and disappointed on an almost continual basis. The austerity measures that are currently crippling our country have been felt by nearly everyone, except the 1% at the top, of course. In the last couple of years, I have seen rent prices soar through the roof in Bournemouth. I'm currently renting a studio flat in Boscombe, which is cheap at the price of £500 a month. I have had to downsize. I used to have a very, very large one-bedroom flat for the same price, and it's amazing the difference you see, and it's not just me. With zero interest rates and tax breaks to buy-to-let investors, we're making Bournemouth a buy-to-let hotspot, which pushes property prices out of regular people's reach, as well as making rent unaffordable. House prices have increased by £226,000 since the 60s on average, and by 11% in the last 3 years. This has led to 70 homeless families in Bournemouth today, 42 of which have children. I've also noticed in the same time period that wages have gone down considerably for myself and my peers. I know from personal experience that we are all doing the same type of work for less money and more hours. How has in-work poverty sneaked into our society and affected so many of us? I've worked with people who openly admitted to not being able to afford to heat their homes. I know a couple who both work full-time whilst their daughter is in nursery, and the mother told me she earns £4 a day after her childcare is deducted from her wages. I know someone else that earned more money as a waitress as she does now in her proper job. And I know lots and lots of people who are downsizing due to rent prices. The Tories are currently presiding over the longest decline in wages since records began. We've simply got poorer under this government. We now have the highest poverty rates for 30 years, not to mention a 19% wage gap between men and women. This makes me wonder how students feel with all of this ahead of them. Are they excited to finish university and join the working world? From the many students I've spoken to, most are anxious and unsure about their futures in our current society. We're very fortunate to have two great universities in Bournemouth. They not only contribute to our local economy enormously, but they also bring us new skills and talent. How can we expect to keep them here when they've got crippling debts and soaring rents and low-paid jobs to look forward to when they leave? They will make the obvious choice and move to a big city, and will lose the talent that's been nurtured in our town. So on the one hand, we've got people experiencing living costs soaring and lower wages. But on top of that, we're also suffering from the dreaded austerity. Austerity is a big word, and we hear it over and over again. But how is it directly affecting us here? Local frontline services have been hit extremely hard, and with local police forces being cut again and again. A couple of local police officers came into my place of work last week, and I got chatting to them about the cuts. They told me that, as well as many rural police stations closing, the cuts had also forced the closure of Boscombe Police Station. As all of us are local, we know the difficulties that Boscombe can experience, and I think we can all agree that the closure of Boscombe is austerity measures taken too far. They explained to me that Boscombe is classed as a red zone, and by no means can they police it effectively from Bournemouth when they also have the added strain of covering all the other stations that have now closed. We've been told time and time again by the current government that austerity measures are vital to ensure our economic recovery. But I just cannot see how sacrificing our frontline services can possibly benefit us as a society. As well as the police, cuts are also being made to our local NHS services. If Tory spending plans of austerity continue for the public sector, then one of the main hospitals in Dorset will be closed or seriously downgraded. The Green Party stands alone against the Tories, Labour, Lib Dems and UKIP in supporting the original post-war ethos of the NHS as being publicly owned and delivered. Instead of taking money from vital services that all of us rely on, why isn't our current government recouping unpaid taxes from the many corporations that are thriving in tax haven Britain? In a recent poll, 85% of the British public agreed that tax dodging by large multinationals is morally wrong, even if it's legal. I simply do not understand why we continually scandalise the poorest of our society in the press over benefit fraud. Benefit fraud costs us 1.2 billion, which is a lot. Tax evasion costs us over 70 billion. We have just 300 HMRC employees investigating tax evasion and a whopping 3,250 Department of Work and Pensions employees chasing benefit fraud. Who worked on that maths? The Green Party has pledged to introduce a tax dodging bill in the first 100 days after the election to finally put an end to this and to recoup some of the 70 billion owed to us. With policies for people and not corporations, the Greens are going from strength to strength as the public become tired of funding that 1%. Membership has quadrupled to make us the third largest UK-wide party. People are listening, and guess what? The more people that listen, the bigger we get. As soon as people become aware of our policies, then they make their choice. They vote for themselves. They vote for the common good. I'd like to answer your questions as well now, if that's all right.
Go ahead, yeah.
So there's particular questions from the Humanists. For ending religious selection in school admissions, we 100% would do that. Admission should be based on fair measures. You shouldn't be segregating children anyway based on their background, their wealth, their religion, anything like that. To end compulsory Christian worship in schools, 100%. You should never have to force a child to be, think, say anything. You know, the whole point of school is to create, nurture and let them develop with guidance. Including humanism at GCSE and A-level. I don't know what the exact Green Party stance is in including them in the syllabus, but I know for sure that we want to teach humanism, but I'm not sure exactly where it will be in the syllabus. Bishops in the House of Lords. You're not the only party that wants to abolish the House of Lords, we do as well. We want to make it a secular house that everyone's voted in. So if a bishop gets voted in, great, but he has to be voted in, or she has to be voted in. Assisted dying, again, we are actively promoting this. We're working with Debbie Purdy and Dignity in Dying to make it legal. And humanist marriage, of course. It's marriage, it's about love. It doesn't matter where you come from or what your religion is, you know. 100% you should be able to have a humanist marriage. There should be no discrimination at all. And on a personal note, I'm going to my first humanist marriage this year, so I'm very much looking forward to it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lizzie, and for answering those particular questions as well. So I'm now going to call upon Martin Holden, who's the parliamentary candidate for Bournemouth West UKIP. Martin.
Right, well, firstly, can I say thank you for inviting me here this evening. I'll tell you a little bit about me, then I'll go on to talk about UKIP policy, because that's probably far more interesting. Now, I'm 42 years old, I'm married, and my wife and I are lucky to have two very, I'll describe them as spirited children. I think that's probably the best description. For the last 15 years, I've worked as the managing director of a local web design and development company. So this is the sort of thing that deals in technology, database creation, large-scale projects that are delivered online. I was actually first moved to Bournemouth in '92 and attended Arts University, as it was back then. And I've moved away from Bournemouth a couple of times, both for work, but I've always ended up coming back here because this has always felt like home. And so I think I can say I've experienced Bournemouth in several different stages of life. Firstly as a student, then as a young single man, and now as a man who's helping raise a family and also has a full-time job. Now, a strange thing happened to me 6 weeks ago when I first got the invitation to come here. The email came in and my chairman rang me up and said, "You've been given an invitation to the hustings at the Dorset Humanists Society." Now, both at the same time, we both said to each other on the phone, "What the hell's a humanist?" And I thought, is this going to be just a weird crackpot bunch of weirdos? And my chairman John said to me, he goes, "Well, we're UKIP, so we're quite used to that anyhow. You should feel quite at home." So I actually spent some time going through the Humanist website, and now I think it's fair to say that I am not religious. I don't have a faith. I've never realised that there were labels for people like myself, atheist, agnostic, whatever you care to call it. I didn't subscribe to any of them, I'm just me. So I read your website and some more information. I actually found myself thinking, well, these guys sound alright actually. They might not throw things at me. Well, we'll find out by 9:30, of course. And I read some more, and then I came across a quote that was on your site. Many of you will have read it, but I'll repeat it because it actually chimed with me quite a lot. And it was by Robert Green Ingersoll, and he said, "If a man would follow today the teachings of the Old Testament, he would be a criminal. If he would follow strictly the teachings of the New Testament, he would be insane." And I read that and I thought, I'm going to like this crowd. I may well see if I can get a poster of that put up there. And then, of course, I read some of the emails that came through with a list of subjects that I think they should say to the candidates that we might want to research. And I was reading it, and for the first time doing one of these events, I found myself thinking, they're actually asking the right questions. Because it was questions on the economy, there were questions on banking reform, and I hope this is something we're going to get into later on tonight, because it's absolutely crucial. And there's so many people now talking about the economy who think they know what they're talking about, or hearing things on the TV that said, but they don't know the backstory of it. So it sometimes sounds good, but actually the opposite is the case. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second, but I'll give you the headlines, the UKIP headlines, if you're not familiar with it already. Our first policy is to leave the European Union, to stop being Little England and get back to being Great Britain. Because the European Union, we think, is fundamentally undemocratic, it is corrupt, they've been unable to even sign their own accounts off for the last 19 years. This is an organisation which, frankly, is anti-democratic. We also want to look after the NHS. Despite what some parties will tell you, we've pledged £3 billion a year extra to frontline NHS services. Now, during sort of 2012 to 2014, my company was actually building HR recruitment software for the NHS, so I know quite a little bit about NHS recruitment. And at one point, our software was bought by 15% of the UK's PCTs. It was to manage the change from PCTs to CCGs. And I can tell you that if you have a well-run organisation, you have something called an employment pyramid. And strange enough, it kind of looks like this, as you might expect, where it has a managing director at the top, a small amount of senior management, larger amount of middle management, and then the most amount of people are the people dealing with the customers at the front end. And that's a well-run, efficient organisation. The NHS doesn't have a pyramid. It is more like an oval with a flat bottom. There is far too much in the middle management, and we want to make sure we direct £3 billion extra a year into that, including an increase of 130 million specifically for dementia research. Because until I read the policy, I wasn't aware that dementia is the #1 killer for women over the age of 54 in this country. And at the moment, it's chronically underfunded. We also want to increase the personal allowance to about £13,500 a year. And that's based on someone doing a 40-hour week at minimum wage. Because if you're earning the minimum wage and then having tax taken off it, it's not really a minimum wage anymore. And we think that's quite fair. And of course, many of you will already be aware that we want to create what we're calling an Australian-style points-based system for immigration. This is one of the contentious issues with some people. But really, we just want to focus on quality rather than quantity. And our policy says, we don't care where you come from, we don't care about the colour of your skin, we don't care what God you believe in, we don't care what God you don't believe in. It's all the same, wherever you come from, wherever in the world, if you meet the criteria that we have laid down, you will be welcomed in. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that I'll be talking a little bit about the economy, and again I hope you've got lots of questions about this. But you're going to hear a lot, particularly from the Conservatives, about how well we're doing, about how the economy is growing, how we're getting to 2.5% growth a year. But I wonder how many people are actually aware that the GDP figures include the money we are borrowing. Now let's just wind that back a little bit. So we're looking at about 2.5% growth a year, and our economy is about 1.7 trillion. It's a little bit under, but give or take, it makes my maths a bit easier. We're borrowing 90 billion a year. That's about 5% of the economy, and we're throwing it into the GDP figures. And yet we're getting growth of 2.5%. So the question you really should be asking of all your parliamentary candidates is, what the hell's happening to the other 2.5%? What state is the economy really in? The truth of the matter is, we are still in recession. We have been in recession, if you strip out government borrowing figures, since 2003. This is now the longest, this is longer than the Depression of the 30s. And this is part of the reason why a lot of people are saying, well, hang on, you're saying the economy is getting better. I'm not feeling it in my pocket. And I think actually, there's a lot of the candidates standing up here today who are going to be talking on the similar thing for the similar reasons. Now, of course, there are some other quite amusing things about the growth, and I use the word inverted commas, the growth that we're experiencing. One of the fudges, if I can call it that the Treasury did last year, was that it was allowed to incorporate figures from some new parts of the economy. And basically what it did, it said, well, we're going to include now an estimate of some things that we've never been able to include before. This is from what's called the black economy, and they now make an estimate into the official GDP figures for prostitution and illegal drug sales. I mean, you can check this out when you go home. This is seriously true. Now, in an act of what I might call supreme karma, the European Union then looked at this and said, well, hang on, the last few years your economy's been doing a bit better. Therefore, you're going to owe us more money. And sent David Cameron a bill for an extra 1.7 billion. Which, of course, Mr Cameron said, there's no way I'm paying that. I'm absolutely not paying that by the 1st of December. And I'll give him his credit, he didn't. He's actually paying it this year instead. So, I think if there's one thing to just either take away from this evening, or from when you're hearing the other candidates speak, or the election material that comes through your door, please just try and remember one simple phrase. Debt is not deficit. They are two different things. The debt is the problem. Officially, 1.5 trillion. The deficit, a slither of that, 90 billion. Deficit is the amount we're adding to the debt every year. So if they're telling you the economy is getting better, what they're really saying is it's getting worse, but the speed at which it's getting worse has slowed a little. I've got to say, that's not a great selling point. When this coalition came to power in 2011, the national debt stood at 811 billion. It's now somewhere around 1.5 trillion. So they have almost doubled the debt in less than half the time. This is not good economics. Please remember that. So, to recap just on some of our things, we're going to save about 10 billion a year in the fees we pay to Brussels after we leave the European Union. As I said before, we want to increase the personal allowances. We're going to save about 10 billion a year from the foreign aid budget. Now that's not scrapping it entirely. We want to make sure that genuine humanitarian aid projects still go ahead. Because quite frankly, the difference between our poverty in this country and poverty elsewhere in the world, it's a million miles away. And I won't be a member of any party that refuses to contribute towards genuine vaccination projects or infrastructure projects to get water to the poorest in the world. I think that's an important point. We also want to abolish inheritance tax, on my last minute, because it only raises 3 billion a year, and yet it's tax on money you've already been taxed on. We think that's grossly unfair. In regards to education, we want to make sure that students taking what's known as STEM subjects, which is science, technology, engineering and medical subjects, don't have to pay tuition fees. So just to sum up in my probably 30 seconds left, The point we're trying to make at UKIP is that you've got an important decision to make on May the 7th. You can either vote for UKIP or you can vote for one of the other parties, and it genuinely doesn't matter which one of the other parties it is, because they all want to be governed by Brussels. A vote for us, a vote for UKIP, is a vote for democracy, a vote for freedom. I passionately believe that we must choose those. We must choose democracy, we must choose freedom, because we can make Britain great again. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. Can I just want to clarify one thing. You mentioned the NHS, and I just want to ask you this question. Will your party end the creeping privatisation of the NHS?
Yes. The privatisation, at the moment, about 6% of NHS services have been privatised. 4.5% of that 6%, or 75%, was done under the Labour government, and it's continued to creep. So when we hear Labour saying, oh, we don't want to privatise the NHS, they're not on a great footing for saying that.
Okay, so very quickly, yes/no answers to these, Martin, if you will. Will UKIP end religious discrimination in schools?
Yes.
Will you include humanism in RE syllabuses?
I don't see why not. I'm completely label independent, so...
Okay, will you end compulsory Christian worship in schools?
Yes. I don't think it should be compulsory. It drives me mad that at my daughter's school they teach Christianity, they teach it as fact rather than stories.
Okay. And will you remove bishops from the House of Lords?
Honestly, I don't know enough about it to make a decision.
And will you legalise assisted dying?
Yes, I think that's perfect. I think that's just for the very reasons that Mike said.
And will you legalise humanist marriage?
Again, I don't know enough about it really, but I don't see a reason why not.
Thank you very much. Okay, last but not least, can I please ask Blair Crawford to come and talk to us about the Conservative Party? Thank you, Blair.
Well, thank you everybody for inviting me, and I must apologise on behalf of both MPs, because as you probably noticed, it's the last week of Parliament, and they would have loved to have been here, but had it been a little bit later, then they would have been. Now, all the others have told you about themselves, and I will tell you a bit about myself. Last year, I retired after 38 years working for the YMCA. And the YMCA, although it is a Christian organisation, and like all the others, declaring where I stand, I am a Christian. But the YMCA is an organisation that is, in many senses, working with people of all faiths and none. And one of the things that really annoys me, it annoys me about politics, it annoys me about religion, is we spend a great deal of time arguing and debating about what divides. When in actual fact, what we all need to do, across all the political parties, and indeed I think across the faith or non-faith groups, because I don't believe that Christians or faith groups have a monopoly on morality, absolutely not. And I have many friends who have been able to say, I can stand shoulder to shoulder with you in fighting for young people. I can stand shoulder to shoulder with you, like we rebuilt locally Folkestone Youth Centre. It was one of the last things that I did in my role as director of the YMCA. It was £4.5 million to do that rebuild. It took me 10 years to do it, and I had to influence a lot of people. And to be frank, I had resisted politics because the YMCA itself is not a political party. It doesn't side with any political party. But I was getting on a bit. I'm 63 this year, and I have a dad who has dementia. I have a disabled son, and there were some things that I felt very passionate about. But I'd resisted politics. But what I tried to do with every breath that I have is to influence all the decision makers at the town hall across the political parties. And so I decided in 2011 that I would stand. Then I had to make a choice, which party? And that's not easy, but I guess that the thing that drew me to the Conservative Party, although I have friends across the political divide, and I guess there are policies in all those parties that I would say, yes, I agree with that. I don't think this purist sort of view on politics, left and right. You're seeing a much more battle for middle ground at the moment. And people are no, they don't. In fact, oftentimes they don't answer the question. I will try answer some of your questions tonight. Perhaps I wouldn't be popular if I didn't. Now, the party manifestos aren't published until next week, so none of us really know what's going to be in those manifestos. We probably have a reasonably good idea, as no doubt you do, but so obviously we can't speak with authority on what's in the manifestos. But what we do know is that on matters of religion, faith, conscience, these sorts of things, there is a free vote. So even if any of the political parties took a particular stance on any one of these issues, it would still be very unlikely that a whip would be applied. In other words, that you'd have to go through, have to vote this particular way. You would vote with your conscience, and certainly on matters of religion and faith and euthanasia and some of the things that are very dear to you, then the influencing of the people that you elect to Parliament is really going to be very important, because two things: one, your own politician. And just like in local politics, I see my first role is to represent the people in my ward, and irrespective of whether I agree with them or not, and whether it is divided opinion, is actually to say, well, some of my constituents will say this, and some of my constituents will say that. And you're living in a society where, if you look at the 2011 census, and you know this, that 25% of the population reported that they have no religion, 59% claim to have Christian beliefs, and the biggest other faith group is Muslims at 5%, which is actually growing, and that won't surprise you, I'm sure, within a multiracial society. So from your philosophical standpoint, do I defend your right to have that standpoint? Absolutely, yes. But what I'd be saying to you is, I'd be looking for areas that I could stand shoulder to shoulder with you, irrespective of your views, where we can actually address some of these challenging issues which are hitting us both nationally and locally. And I don't really so much want to hear about what the problem is. Yes, we have to identify that, but we also have to come up with a solution. When I stood for the Conservatives, I guess the reason why I went with it was because I spent my life trying to rob the rich to help the poor. I knew that if I was going to build a new youth centre in Bournemouth, that somewhere I had to get the money to pay for it. And our economy is like that. Whichever political party you elect on May the 7th will have a challenge of that 1.5 trillion debt. Absolutely. And they will approach how they pay down that debt, because it has to be paid down in one way or another. But if you're going to spend, you have to somehow make the money. And the bottom line is that you either raise taxes or you do it through other measures. And the political parties would obviously address it in a particular way. But the way that they address it, is almost irrespective. And should the most vulnerable in society be protected? Well, ask me that question and I'd say yes. Do I agree personally with every Conservative policy, like the policy coming forward on stopping housing benefit for young people? If you ask me personally, I'd say absolutely not. I've spent my life working with vulnerable young people. Although I think on that particular policy you will see exemptions, and no doubt we can talk about that a wee bit later on. Now, in terms of this particular questions, the yes-no questions, let me just turn my attention to those. So, ending religious selection in schools. Now, the answer to this is probably not if you're looking for a Conservative policy. But having said that, we have a situation at the moment where in the state schools, the origin of the species is largely taught as fact. The faith schools are very popular with people, obviously, from those faith groups. But should anybody want to go to those schools, and if those schools are oversubscribed, they have to take those pupils. The same schools, the faith schools, have to abide by the admissions code. Now, I personally believe, what's education? It is education indoctrination. This is what I'm going to ram into you. Faith school or not, that is not education. Education is about teaching properly and well good subjects from different standpoints and letting young people decide for themselves where they stand. And isn't that true of all of us? You see, even this debate that we're having about Europe, and I know you know that the Conservatives have promised the 2017 referendum, but one of the reasons why it's been pushed to 2017 is because I don't believe, I will include myself in this number, I don't understand all the ins and outs of the knock-on effect of the economy. like my friend from UKIP, I would agree that the bureaucracy needs to be addressed. There's lots of stuff that needs to be renegotiated in Europe, but we have to be careful that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So, very quickly moving on just to address those questions. In terms of ending compulsory Christian worship in schools, well, the answer is probably no in terms of Conservative policy, but at the same time the party believes that it should be for parents to decide for themselves the best option. And of course, it is possible to withdraw your child from those particular sessions. In terms of including humanism in GCE and A-level and so on, well, actually, you've got an ally in somebody perhaps who you wouldn't expect. And his name is the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams. He's urging the government to rethink its plans to leave humanism out of the new GCE curricula. So there you have a Lord arguing actually for your position. And I don't think that you should automatically assume that people, because when you come to the House of Lords, the Conservatives do want reform there. It's unlikely that they would get rid of the Lord Bishops. But when they are there as much to address some of your issues. They're not there to be hammering particular political grounds. They're there on moral grounds. And many of the bishops would argue for you. You just have to find out who those bishops are and go with and make friends of them. Thank you, that's the bell. In terms of removing, I've said from the House of Lords, probably not, but lots of opportunity for interest. Legalise assisted dying, this is a big issue, and clearly I can see that you had issues with your mum and so on, and that would have affected the way you are, but it's a matter of conscience. So you're not going to find a political view around that particular one. It would be a free vote. And no doubt lots and lots of heartache and debate on that one. Of course, you've heard about Lord Falconer's view. In terms of legalised human marriage, you may well, highly probably get this. The government at the moment have looked at the situation in Scotland and they've gone to consultation. And it's very, very possible that could be part of the manifesto. We'll have to see. But it is one area. My own daughter had a celebrant who was taking a humanist point of view, and certainly I think that message is being well heard in Westminster. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering some of your questions.
Well, thank you to all five of our candidates or panellists this evening. So now it's over to you. I am going to stick to our rules tonight. You can't speak unless you have a microphone in front of you, and when you have a microphone in front of you, please speak into it. Don't just wave it about in order to make your point. So Dean has got the audience microphone. So we don't have everyone mic'd up at the front, but Simon is going to run around and I'm going to try and control things from the front. So first question is Roger. Roger.
Thank you very much for all the evidence tonight. I'm a Bournemouth councillor. We're having some answer, passionate support of the NHS. My question is, our Parliament isn't democratic and it never will be before we have proportional representation. Have we heard the views of the panellists, please?
Okay, so very quickly, if we can have a view from all of the panellists on proportional representation, but if you can be very succinct, please, on that question.
Well, I said earlier on about not understanding everything about Europe. I think I'd have to say the same thing personally about proportional representation. But I do go with the fact that equality and being fair about how we address any of these issues, and particularly how we elect people to Parliament, even to our local councils, should equality be top of the agenda, Roger? I would say absolutely yes.
I'd say first past the post is probably now one of the most ridiculous systems of electing any officials in the modern world. Our votes are not equal. across the constituencies. We have kind of 650 different elections rather than one general election, which again is absurd. But proportional representation also has its drawbacks. I myself, I'm not a big fan of this, the additional vote or STV. I kind of prefer AMS myself, a little bit of the kind of Welsh assembly system, I have to say. I kind of like the idea of a constituency representative and a regional representative as well. It does depend on whether you have the kind of Burkean view of representation where you elect them, then they make the decision for you, or do they kind of make the decision based on who is in their constituency and their representatives in that sense. But I think absolutely we need to get rid of first past the post as quickly as possible.
Well, as a member of a party that won a national election under proportional representation, I'm hugely in favour of it. In regard to the question we had back in 2011, the AV vote, I probably would have voted for it, but although I thought the AV plus system, as they were calling it at the time, was a lot fairer. But yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I'd agree with Kim. I think that the first past the post system is completely antiquated. We definitely need a new system that's definitely fairer and make sure that everyone's voices are heard, and we don't end up with a parliament that's just not working cohesively together like the one we've just seen.
As I said earlier, a high proportion of the population of the United Kingdom doesn't bother to vote. They don't bother to vote because they say their vote is not worth it. It makes no difference. They know that they can't vote for certain parties the way they'd like to because they know that that vote won't mean anything in a particular constituency. Proportional representation is the best way that we can give real democracy to the people of the United Kingdom. 110% yes.
Sounds as though we're going to get it fairly soon, doesn't it? Okay. Right, lots of hands up, and I'll try and get to you as soon as I can. Just at the back there, yes.
Thank you very much. I was intrigued by a couple of the comments from Martin from UKIP, particularly around the growth figures being linked to borrowing, which I hadn't heard before, and by that logic I think Greece should have the highest growth rate in Europe, so I couldn't quite get it. Also, I think around the inheritance tax, just to point out the vast majority of that which is liable for inheritance tax comes from property which people haven't earned and haven't paid tax on, so I think that is a reason why it's a valid thing. However, the thing I wanted to pick up on was a statement which you've used and other parties do use, but it's a particular favourite of UKIP's, which is to make Britain great again, which implies that you want to go back to another period in time when Britain was doing something differently. Now, I'm not sure whether that's going back and storming other countries and claiming them as an empire, or whether it's Victorian times when the vast majority of people lived in absolute poverty, or whether it's maybe 1945 when you want to see industries renationalised and massive building of council houses. So my question to the panel is, would you like to make Britain great again? And if so, which period of time would that be?
I think it's addressed. So the question is addressed to all five. So again, we'll just quickly, please go to all five if you would like to.
Well, would I like to make Britain great again? Absolutely yes, because I'm proud of the country that we live in. Would I want to go back to colonialism and all of that stuff? Absolutely not. But many of the countries actually where we did the wrong thing actually value the good things that we did. So for me, it would be about let's build on the positive, accentuate the positive, not try and rule the world, but influence the world in whatever way we can as Brits for what is right and proper.
I think I would argue differently. I think we are a great country, despite what we hear in the papers all the time. We're one of the most tolerant, law-abiding, wonderful societies on earth. We've never been more appreciative of each other. We've never been more caring of each other. We've never had as much care for welfare with each other, apart from what the Tories are doing at the moment. Yes, there are divides between us. For the vast majority of Brits, I think, and non-Brits as well, want to live in our society because it's an absolutely fantastically inclusive society. And I wouldn't want to live in any other time.
Well, thank you for the question, a good question. When we say we want to make Britain great again, we have to remember that our culture, our industry, our country was founded when we could trade freely with the rest of the world. At the moment, we cannot do that. We cannot organise, we cannot negotiate our own free trade agreements with America, with China. We can't do it. Iceland, last year, negotiated a free trade agreement with China, a country with a population of 300,000 people. So we are good enough to do it ourselves. We don't need this so-called clout that the EU gives us. And when people say UKIP, they want to go back to the 1950s and 60s, that's just nonsense. All we want to do is make it so that we can trade and we can be friendly with Europe. We'll buy their goods, they'll buy our goods. We just want to open up the rest of the world rather than being shackled to a tiny continent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting question. I think that the Great Britain is around the corner, is what we're working towards now. We've got all of the know-it-all to make it happen. We've got the passion to make it happen. We just need to make sure that we move forward in the right direction and actually achieve it and be a Great Britain.
As far as I'm concerned, we are a great Britain. We are a great people. We're tolerant and understanding. Now, there is a lot we could do to make us greater, though. A policy I tried to actually implement and introduce 4 to 5 years ago, set up a campaign called Support UK Industries campaign. Do you know if everyone in the UK spent £5 a week more on British goods and services and £5 a week less on imported goods and services, it would overnight create £15.9 billion worth of increased demand. That alone would create several 100,000 jobs within the UK, and that would significantly reduce our budget deficit. We've had a balance of trade deficit for the last 30 years. I think we've had 4 months we've actually had a balance of trade surplus. The only thing that keeps this country afloat is our balance of services, because we have always had a balance of services surplus. This country is great, but we can make it greater if the people in the UK started supporting UK industry a bit more.
Thank you very much. We'll stay on this side at the back there. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify, when you ask a question, it doesn't have to be to every single member of the panel. You can obviously just direct it to 1 or 2 if you want to, but it's entirely up to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I was recently reading the literature that UKIP are putting out around Bournemouth at the moment, and I was interested to see that one of the things that they have said that they will do if they get elected was to repeal the Climate Change Act. Can you just reassure me that if this was to happen, you will address the problems that are associated very greatly around here by climate change?
Yeah, I think there's sometimes a perception in the media or with people that UKIP are somehow anti-environment, and I need to lay that to rest, because we're not. There is some very important issues on sustainability, and that makes a lot of sense, but the Climate Change Act itself, we think it's too expensive, we think it won't change anything, we think that the money could be used in better places. That's not to say that we want to harm the environment, it's not to say that certain renewable energy methods shouldn't proceed. Hydroelectric, for example, is a great method. We know when it's going to happen, it's reliable, it doesn't need any backup power. Likewise, when we look at solar power, and when I say that I mean photovoltaics, that can be, because it works on light rather than heat, that can be a net generation to the grid. But the Climate Change Act itself, I think it's just a huge waste of money.
Can I ask Lizzie to respond to that? Yes, to what UKIP are saying.
I'm a bit speechless, to be honest. I can't understand how you can live in this world and not see that climate is a massive issue that we have to address. It's absolutely imperative.
I disagree.
How?
Can you tell me what percentage of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide?
No.
Well, carbon dioxide apparently is this killer gas that we're all supposed to be scared of. Yeah. So if you say 300 parts?
400 parts, which is about 50 parts per million higher than scientists recommend is safe for the future continuous supply.
So one person in the audience knows, but thank you, sir.
No, we know, we do know, yeah.
Simply, we're looking at around 1/3 of 1%. And the Climate Change Act, thank you, we're looking at about 1/3 of 1% of our atmosphere is carbon dioxide. And when you look at the IPCC report, it says that somewhere between 3 and 3.5% of human output is by human industrial output. So it's not all industry, it's not all coal-fired power stations belching things into the atmosphere. When you take that 3.5% into a third of 1%, you end up with a fraction of 1%. I think it's somewhere 0.11%. It's such a tiny amount. We have had temperatures higher in the past. Some people will know, of course, about the medieval warm period where they had vineyards in Northampton. We don't have them now. The Climate Change Act is too expensive, but that doesn't mean to say that we're not going to have green policies and be promoting certain types of renewable energy.
Could I just, would you mind? All right. Climate change is here. It's not going away. It's going to be here for the rest of our lives and for the next 10, 15, 20,000 years plus. You talk about carbon dioxide, that is one of the problems, but that is nothing in comparison to other stuff going into the atmosphere. The big concern is methane. Can I have a quick show of hands? How many of you are aware of the Siberian peat bogs, which are thawing? This is a huge problem. I think it's 300,000 tonnes of methane is now being released from Siberia into the atmosphere. Methane is 20 times more dangerous than carbon dioxide. We are going to have global warming. The temperature is going to rise. The water levels are going to rise, and we can't stop it. We've reached that tipping point. To say that climate change is not important, I'm speechless.
I want to move on from climate change. I mean, climate change is obviously important, but we don't want to talk about that to the exclusion of other topics. Martin, briefly, you can say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, just going to say, no one is saying the climate isn't changing. We're looking at what we could actually do to stop it. We can't stop the climate changing. It started at the Big Bang, it will change last week, it'll change next week. We're not saying climate change isn't happening, we're not denying it. We're looking at what we can reasonably do. And when we look at who is pumping the stuff into the atmosphere, you've got China, you've got the emerging economies in India. Our contribution to it it's an absolute sliver, it's nothing.
So we just ignore.
Okay. Let's take another question. I'm going to stick on this side just for a moment. I will come to this side. Barney, I think you've got your hand up.
We've heard some quite alarming figures about the economy, which seems the national debt seems to have grown under the Conservatives' austerity measures. So we've heard from Martin that he plans to leave the EU and generate a lot of money that way. We've heard from Liz that she wants to tax the corporations and then put an end to tax dodging. What have the other parties got in plan for how to pay for everything and how to get on top of the rising debt?
Well, I'm glad I asked my colleagues to do some notes so I can read what they've given to me. Well, you know that having heard the budget, that the cornerstone of the Conservative policy is the economy. And like I said in my address, that however way you do it, you have to pay down that 1.5 trillion. So what I've got here is that the government, this inherited the biggest deficit in our peacetime history. And they would say that they're making good progress. The deficit is now down by half to 5% of GDP. I'm just simply reading what I have here. Okay. So it's vital that we carry on working through the long-term economic plan, because the only way we can have strong public services is to rely on a strong economy. If we're going to invest in the NHS, my area is adult social care. Do we need more money in that demand-led services, which incidentally locally is 2/3 of the council budget at 72 million and increasing? Then we need to think about ways of how we're going to look after those vulnerable people and pay for that. So the economy needs to be a cornerstone. We have to be making money for the country in order to pay down our debt and to invest in all the services.
You obviously, Martin explained earlier that debt and deficit is a very different thing. I think it's been quite clear to everyone that the Tories have, as they say, cut too fast and too hard. Labour do want to follow a responsible spending plan, but I think what the scary thing is 60% of the cuts haven't really happened yet. So if you think by the end of 2020, our public services are going to be quite properly screwed by that sense. What we really need is not necessarily cuts, but we need better tax receipts essentially. And to do that, we need a growing economy. So we need more money into the infrastructure, more money for small businesses, which is everything that the FSB is talking about. Ed Miliband is also talking about as well. They kind of applauded him very strongly last time. It's letting councils set local tax rates to really empower local businesses in that sense. It's everything about trying to claw back as much money as we can from tax dodgers, and that's along with the Green Party, with cutting down as much as we can, getting receipts back from those taking money overseas. So we're closing down and trying to get the overseas tax corporations to actually publicise where their money is and where it's going. And so we are going to be responsible with our spending. It's not going to be the same levels that it was between 2000 and 2010. But it's really about saying that we need to get the economy growing to get the tax receipts in to actually pay for these things, rather than just cutting, absolutely everything, which is what the Tories do.
I'll just quickly say, obviously you heard what I said about the debt and deficit before, and I'm pleased that people are remembering the difference. The other thing, of course, I think we're all agreeing that we should tackle corporate tax avoidance. We think that's fundamentally unfair, and as we said before, it's morally indispensable, even if it's technically legal. So that's one thing that we want to add into it.
Just to recap, so the Green Party want to introduce a wealth tax on the top 1% and the closure of all tax loopholes to get back that 70 billion that's owed to us.
Okay, Lib Dems believe that we should have a mansion tax. We also believe that we should most certainly be tucking it out, working on those tax avoidance schemes from corporations and individuals. The simple way that the Starbucks, etc., managed to get away with it, they use something called transfer pricing. They simply they're a multi-conglomerate company, and they have a holding company, I believe in Belgium, which has the lowest rate of corporation tax in Europe, and everything goes through Belgium, or the holding company. So they're probably buying a polystyrene cup for about 27 pence each. In reality, it's 0.01% probably. What we need to do, my proposal would be that you set up an individual section of accounting specialists within the in the revenue for each individual corporation. They would work out roughly what are the total costs. They would then estimate what the actual real cost would be of a polystyrene cup and all the other things, estimating on the total number of sales that they have across the country. They then work out the profit margin, they turn the column in, say, right, we believe you've actually made this much profit. I don't know if you were aware of this. All right, sorry. We would then turn around and say, right, we believe you owe so many £100 million of tax to us. Prove us wrong, or pay up, or get out of the country. There's plenty other coffee shops out there that do pay corporation tax. For as far as individuals who use the Swiss bank accounts are concerned, I put up the proposal that what we should be doing is we should be proposing that they could lend money to the government and get a small rate of interest for that payment, and then rather than put it to Swiss bank accounts. We are currently borrowing billions and billions and billions of money. Well, let's borrow some of that money from our own residents. They will get a smaller rate of interest. Then when they eventually come on the hard times and their income goes down, they can then claim back in that loan. They would get the money back, but they would pay tax on that then.
Okay, right, thank you. I'd like to just come back to Barney, because I'd like to know whether Barney is actually feeling reassured by these answers. I mean, I'm just conscious that we've had 5 years of austerity, and yet the Tories have borrowed another £600 billion. God help us if we don't have austerity. Do you know what I mean? So, Barney, what was your response to what you've heard?
Fairly confused. I didn't feel that Blair answered the question, because we sort of said, well, look, we've had austerity for the last 4 years and the debt's gone up. And he sort of replied, well, the deficit's gone down, but as we've heard tonight, that means that actually we are borrowing more, the debt's gone up. So I wasn't really sure about that at all. The other parties said, well, Kim sort of said, well, yeah, we actually have to spend more to get the debt down, which seems counterintuitive and seems to me how we got in this mess in the first place. And then the other parties seem to be sort of jumping on Liz's bandwagon and say, oh yeah, we're going to deal with the corporation tax, but in a sort of fairly vague way, so fairly sort of terrified for where this leads us in the future, really.
I'd like to just ask Kim to respond to that particular point. Is it Labour Party policy to sort of borrow more in order to invest, in order to get the deficit, or not, the debt down? Is that how the economic idea would work?
It wouldn't be a case of borrowing more. I mean, you just have to look in the examples of history. Look at Roosevelt's New Deal. You look at everything after the Second World War with the Marshall Aid, etc., things like that. It was all massive cases of saying we need huge, or not huge, that's going to scare everyone, but we need, and you look at what Obama did post-2008 as well, you need to have big kind of push for infrastructure, push for growth, in order that they can actually grow the economy and then reap the tax receipts from that. There's no point in just kind of strangling what everyone has and strangling the small amount of money that everyone has, and then watch the shrinking economy try and then get money back from that instead. So you need to grow the economy with big infrastructure projects to that extent, and then try and reap the rewards from that.
Blair, can I pass? I want to pass this to you because I just want you to respond to this idea that austerity hasn't worked. I know that the Tory party for years and years now have been saying, oh, the deficit's coming down, it's coming down, it's coming down, but we all know now that that means that the debt continues to go up and up and up, but just at a slightly lower rate. So austerity hasn't worked. Will the Tory party now admit this? Has actually George Osborne abandoned austerity? Sometimes we read that he gave it up years ago, apparently. Has he?
I don't think that if Osborne was sat here tonight that he would say that at all. And in fact, you saw in his budget speech what he said was that some of the measures are working. And in fact, he said that the path that we're currently on to reduce the 1.5 trillion, it could happen faster if the economy keeps growing. We were down to 0% in terms of interest as of yesterday. We know that there is a growing economy. It's worked well for pensioners, by the way, in terms of coming up, on my own pension. It's true that we haven't seen economic growth for the last 7 years, but those of you who've got pensions invested, they'll be growing about 3%, many of on that money, and then you've got the triple lock there. So it's not all bad news for everybody. And you saw that there was a certain amount of giveaway in the budget. Now, if he went too far, no matter what promises he would make, the Chancellor would bankrupt the country. And I don't think any politician nationally would go on and say, make those claims or start to give money away, because it wouldn't be too long before we're in a position as Greece is at the moment. So I think that the measures are working. The Bournemouth Council has had its grant cut by 50%, so we know what it is to have to deal with austerity. And when I'm sat around the cabinet table and my other cabinet members are looking at me with my 72 million budget and growing, and how do we deal with that? Well, the answer is that you've heard about trading companies and all that sort of thing. We know that the next 2 years things are going to get worse in terms of local government. But we either have to ride this storm, and how can you get gain without pain? And I get a little bit concerned when I hear some of the other parties speaking and not talking about pain. Our country was in a very bad state. You know about that famous note when we took over, sorry guys, there is no money left. That was true. And the economy that we're presiding over now, it is not the economy that the government took over. There's a great deal more to do, but let's not tickle people's ears. Let's not pretend that there is not pain. There's pain for local government, and we have to think about creative ways of dealing with that pain. For myself, the most vulnerable people in Bournemouth, the elderly, the mentally affected, those who are have disability of any kind, that all has to be paid for. In fact, I was speaking to the council executive team the other day, and I said, you know, guys, we don't have to in Bournemouth do tourism. We do not have to do youth work, but we do have to do social care, children's and adult social care. It's not an option, it has to be done. Now, is the youth service important? You're talking to a youth worker, somebody who spent 38 years. Does that have to be preserved? Absolutely. Does our tourism have to be preserved? Absolutely. But the question is, how do we do it? And some things...
Okay.
Yeah,
I think you've made the point. I'm just going to come back on one thing. Yes, we all know that the Labour Party said there's no money left, but the Bank of England seems to be able to conjure it out of thin air. Hundreds of billions of it. But anyway... very briefly, Martin, and then we will go to some other questions on the right-hand side here.
Thank you. I was just going to say that Blair said, you know, we're in danger of being bankrupt. We're already bankrupt. The only reason we're not like Greece is because we have a Bank of England, we have our own currency, and we can print it to oblivion, which is something they've been doing.
Okay, thank you. Neil, you've had your hand up for quite some time, so can I go to Neil next, please?
Hi, evening. The parliamentary system that we've got necessarily means that the parties have to focus on policies over the next 5 years, which is perfectly understandable. But I think one thing that's really missing from most general election campaigns, and this one in particular, is the question of vision. And what do you think are the most important issues facing the country and the world over 25, 50, 100 years? And what policies have you got which might address those?
Okay, let's start with this end.
Lucky me. Cheers, guys. That's a really nice one. Can I move possibly down the other end? Right. What's the biggest danger? What's the biggest issue? As far as I'm concerned, it is, and you're going to find this very strange, the biggest issue facing planet Earth, in my opinion, at the moment, is the floating seas of plastic. Can I ask how many of you are aware of these islands of plastic? They are bigger than America. There are 5 seas of plastic floating around the oceans. They are slowly breaking down with the sun and the tidal passages. They're getting smaller and smaller bits of plastic. They're being eaten by marine life. They're being eaten by fish. They're being fed by albatrosses to their young. And we're coming across more and more carcasses of birds dying, and inside their stomachs it's full of plastic, especially plastic bottle tops. It's now getting into the food chain in Southeast Asia. I was talking to one of my ex-students who's a very successful entrepreneur in Hong Kong, and he was saying, if I could come up, because I'm, among other things, an inventor and an innovator, if I could come up with some system to clear those islands, I could ask whatever price I want. It's the biggest danger for the human race. 70% of the Earth's oxygen is created by the oceans. We are killing the oceans. And I'm sorry to say, I should be talking about unemployment and everything, but I'm looking at the bigger picture. The survival of the human race will be dependent upon us sorting out those floating islands of plastic. Sorry.
It's a very, very big question. There's so many issues that are so important to everyone, and then everyone isn't enough. There's issues that are important to our planet as well. It's so broad. So if I had to narrow it down to one thing, I would say that the most important thing for us to do is focus on education. Not enough people know about the impacts that we have, environmental damage, or the impacts we make to other humans in our relationships, or the inequalities that are in our world, not just in our country or in our town. So I believe that the most important thing we should focus on is education, and I don't just mean in schools. I mean making people aware of the issues that we have and helping to create solutions. If people care, then they will try to make a solution. So the more people that care, the more solutions we have.
Dorset Humanists is doing its bit to try and educate people on all of these questions. So just thought I'd give a little plug to Dorset Humanists. See on programme for more educational events. Martin.
Thank you. Well, it's a very interesting point, actually, that you make, that parliamentary terms being 5 years. So politicians plan for 5-year terms, and they don't plan any longer because they will spend the money and they won't get to see the benefits. Somebody else will. This is why countries like Germany do so well, partly, because they've had coalitions for the last 60 years and they plan for 20, 25, 50 years. In answer to the question about what I think will be the vision, what will be the biggest dangers as well, it will be probably the same as what we've had for the last 50 years. It will be energy and security. Those two are very closely linked. UKIP policy is to renew Trident or whatever similar system is available, because quite frankly, not having the ultimate deterrent is crazy. The world is not getting a safer place, and although the system of having an at-sea nuclear deterrent is called mutually assured destruction, MAD for short, mad it may well be, but it's worked. It's worked for 70 years, and we think it'll work for another 70.
Yeah, the surest way to guarantee the safety is to have lots more nuclear weapons. Also, it has, but yes, especially for the residents of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Also, to disagree with 99% of peer-reviewed science is also a really good platform as well for a party to stand on. I think Neil, isn't it? It's a really broad question. I think the worry I have is that we don't elect enough statesmen or kind of stateswomen in that sense, that it's just these kind of political researchers who do a little bit for each other and then get put into these safe seats, etc. And we kind of develop a system where it is just a kind of a slog for 5 years. We have a very fickle kind of population at the moment where we end up going Labour or the swing back to Conservative, and it isn't helped by this very lackluster media that we seem to have that's owned by 2 or 3 people. And it's definitely our population as a whole that needs to take responsibility for that. We need to elect people with vision that can deal with the problems in 20, 30 years' time. Imagine being, some of you may have been, but 1945 when Clement Attlee was elected, to see that as an actual vision that we're going to have a real stability for those that are most vulnerable in society. And I think it's more politicians that we're missing, the Churchills, the Attlees, the David Lloyd Georges, the ones that really have a vision for Britain that isn't just let's make Britain great again, but we don't really know what that we mean by that.
Well, to quote a fellow humanist, he wrote these words: "Politics, it seems to me, for years, for far too long, has been concerned with right and left instead of right and wrong." And to move from him to Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "The day the power of love overrules the love of power, the world will know peace." I think the trouble with so many of us is that we are forever arguing about that which divides. If somehow magically, all of us here and all of our colleagues could learn to work together to bring the best of what we've got, to have debate in the human interest, then wouldn't that be a great day? I think that we have to start thinking about what country, what world are we going to pass on to our children. And clearly what we have to do is to rise above the selfish drive, to rise above the drive for power, which actually forgets what it's all about. In terms of right and wrong, of course, what is right? What is wrong? That is the great debate. But if we lose that, then I think we lose our way and we lose vision.
Blair, if the Conservative Party does win a majority in the forthcoming election, are we all in it together under a Conservative government?
It depends who you're talking to, doesn't it? If I say to you that locally, because obviously I know local politics, the other candidates have been able to be, spoke very well really about the national scene, but here locally, I'm working with people who are from very, very different backgrounds and very different viewpoints. And quite honestly, if there's one thing that I miss in Bournemouth's council chamber is more meaningful debate, because one of the problems when you have a strong majority is that you miss out on that dialogue and debate. That's not to say that we don't want as Conservatives see a majority, we don't want to see a Conservative government. But I'll go back to my original point. I think anybody who wouldn't want to work with people, and particularly those who disagree, what a boring world it would be if we were talking the same. But when you see Prime Minister's Question Time, I'm told that it's not like that at all in the halls of government. there is a lot more dialogue in committee. There's a lot more sharing between the political parties, albeit that they hold very different views. And that's what really politics is about, isn't it? And what we see, unfortunately, in the television question time, as we maybe see it tonight, it's a bit of a show, isn't it? But at the end of the day, you know, we are responsible for running our country and for running our world, and we've got to do that together.
Thank you, Blair. Paul, and then I'll come to Gemma next.
Thank you. Right, okay, let's go back to basic economics.
Briefly,
We've
please,
got a situation where we're up to our eyes in debt. We've got billions invested in the banks to get them out of trouble, and then we still let the directors of the banks pay themselves millions in bonuses instead of putting the money back into the bank, giving more interest to the people with the money in the bank so they can spend it and develop the economy. And then to turn around again, then we've lowered their taxes, these guys with the millions of bonuses. I mean, what side are they on? Do they think we're stupid?
So, Paul, thank you, but do you have a question in there?
Yes, what do they propose to do about the exorbitant wages bonuses for the bankers?
Okay.
If I'm employing someone and paying them a salary, I expect them to do the job.
Yep.
If they do the job correctly or incorrectly now, I give them a bonus. I've already paid him to do the job properly.
Okay. Briefly, let's have an answer from everyone on the panel. What will you do about bankers' bonuses?
Well, clearly we need to do what we can do in terms of government. We have to remember that a lot of this is out of our control, because you can't legislate to one level, but what a company will pay its directors and the CEO, that is really something else. So I think all the parties will probably say, yeah, we need to legislate against this injustice, but at the same time, being realistic, know that people in the private sector will do what they want to do. Well, as shareholders, then we've got to let our voices be heard. You know, not buy shares in those companies. That would be a good start, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that was Darling and Brown's kind of lack of foresight there in terms of when bailing out the banks, they kind of didn't put it in writing, but yeah, try and act nicely when we give you this money afterwards. So I do apologise for that on their behalf there. The late, you know, Ed Miliband and Ed Balls are coming up with some very stringent kind of attempt at regulation for bankers, that, you know, obviously capping bankers' bonuses and things like that. One thing the European Union is trying to push, I'm sure some of you might have heard of this, which is the kind of Robin Hood tax, which is a really, really small transaction on every banking transaction between the different banks. And it's something that I think the Labour Party won't move to block, which obviously the Conservatives are blocking at the moment, and we would see to actually try and raise a lot of revenue from it.
Okay, well, I mean, I sympathise with the question because, you know, what we've got is we've got a lot of publicly owned banks, Lloyds, RBS, and they're saying we have to pay our top bankers this money because otherwise they'll leave. And what I'm saying is, fine, let them go. Call their bluff, let them go. You know, I don't care if the talent leaves, because someone else who hasn't caused or at least contributed to this financial crisis will come up and they'll do the job better. Let's let them go. But earlier on in your question, or the pre-question, you were talking about why they were getting this much money. It's a theory that economists have come up with called trickle-down economics. I don't know how many people have perhaps heard that phrase. And the idea is that you completely soak the rich with millions and millions of pounds, and then they spend the money to the people providing them services, and they spend the money to the people providing them services, and eventually it gets down to the very bottom of people in society. The theory is good, except there's a problem in that money doesn't reach the bottom of people in society straight away. It can take years, and by that time, the level of inflation has eroded what the value of the money was. So this idea that we soak the rich to make everyone else richer is just nonsense, and I just want to see them called out and called the bluff. And if they want to go, let them go.
Thank you. Lizzie.
I never thought I'd say this in my whole life, but
I'll wait for it.
I agree with you. I agree with you on this point and this point alone. But yes, trickle-down effect does not work. If they want to leave, let them go. Yes, 100% we need legislation. They cannot get away with this. It's just absolutely disgusting. How they still pay bonuses? Paul, I completely agree with your point. You do a good job, you get a bonus. You don't do a good job, you don't get a bonus. Simple as that. I just cannot see it in any other way but black and white.
Here's a surprise number 2. Lib Dems agree with UKIP.
You're all coming round to our...
What does worry me, though, is the Conservative Party now want to raise tens of billions of pounds by selling off the shares in the banks that we've actually bought and helped out. Now, I do not believe this is the right time to actually cash those shares in. We should drip feed the shares over a longer period of time, and we will get significantly more money back. We'll not only get all the money that we put in back, we'll get interest on that money. But unfortunately, I have to say, I believe the Conservative Party are only after a quick fix to get a load of money which they can then use to basically buy votes. I think we don't just ask them if they're not happy to leave, we tell them to leave. There is plenty of talent in the universities of this country who can do the job at half the price, a quarter of the price. Look, I'm an academic, I'm a teacher or a lecturer. If I do well, my students are satisfied with what I do. I get good results, I don't get a bonus. I get paid a salary, I am just doing my job. If everyone else in this room, you do your job to the best of your ability, do you expect a bonus for it? No, you take pride in your work and you work to the best of your ability. It's ridiculous to give them a bonus.
Paul, just very briefly, have you heard anything from the 5 panellists that reassure you on this particular question, just briefly?
Well, the UKIP member certainly seems to have the right attitude.
Okay, UKIP have right.
They just sidestep the issue, and the point is that I've employed many people in my career as a company director, and I pay them a salary to do a job. I expect them to do that job properly. That's why I pay them a salary. If they don't do it properly, I get rid of them. Right? If they do it properly, they've earned their salary. I don't have to give them a bonus for doing it properly. That's what I employed them for, and give them a fair wage in the first place.
Okay.
You know, it's scandalous.
The only time I was paid a bonus was when I worked for Lloyd's TSB, but I don't work for them. I've now worked for local government. I haven't had a pay rise in about 5 years. Anyway, Gemma.
As humanists, we believe passionately in equality, and there is one of the questions on our sheet that I couldn't help noticing has been lightly, if not totally ignored by the panel, and that is, will you, if you were elected, would you support LGBT rights?
Your question on the legalising humanist marriage, because during the passage of the Marriage as the Same-Sex Couples Act of 2013, Parliament at the same time also debated whether the law should be changed in terms of legalising humanist marriage. Now, obviously, you know that in terms of the same-sex marriage that is now legalised. I think that really that justice is something, obviously, which will be a stance that we would take. I mean, you talked about making Britain great in terms of equality. Well, if we're going to legislate for that in our own country, why would we not then take a stance to argue that human right, across other countries? It would be hypocritical not to do so, but obviously it's not going to make everybody jump up and say, great.
But Blair, is that what foreign ministers do actually do? Let's say when they go to Russia or Uganda or countries like that, do they actually make a stand on this issue?
I couldn't say with any, I couldn't say categorically yes, they do that, but I do know that ministers, when they go to these countries, have opportunity to talk about all sorts of things. To actually, I mean, for example, Tabaris led a trade delegation to Egypt. Just recently met the president, and I know that one of the things that was on that agenda was equality. Those sorts of things don't hit the headlines, but it does happen. As to who does that,
Okay, thank you. Tim?
Over the past 15 years, I don't think there's a political party that's done more for LGBT rights than the Labour Party, especially nationwide. Internationally, because obviously so much of our resources are, from the Middle East and things like that, I think we need to be a lot tougher with our sanctions and saying that, we don't just want your oil, we want you to adhere to these specific human values that we, as well as the UN, have agreed to in the UN Convention of Human Rights. And I think, the UN needs to play a much bigger role in actually saying, these are what our human values are, we've agreed this, but, it's ratified by over 150 countries, and it's something that they actually need to say, we need severe economic sanctions for those countries that do not adhere to these human rights, whether it's freedom to express whatever you wish in kind of whatever way you wish. In some areas, obviously, they don't care so much about what the UN's going to say or what sanctions they're going to get. So it's to what extent do you then say, well, are we using sanctions, then do we end up using military force? I mean, ISIS, quite recently, I think in the last month, they've thrown 4 people off a building for being homosexual. So just, sat them on a picnic chair and then threw them off, then stoned them to death when they reached the bottom. And saying, at what point do we just, condemn it in the press and actually say we are going to stand up and do something about it? I'm not, too confident on, start changing British foreign policy at all. But I think the UN needs to play a much more positive role in enforcing human rights around the world.
Well, I'll try and answer the question quickly. Some of you may be surprised that UKIP has got a very active LGBT group within the party. We've also got a very active Twitter and Facebook account for them, and it's growing. In fact, it's tripled in the last couple of years. So, would I try and protect people's rights because of their sexuality? Of course. We don't care whether you're gay, straight, lesbian. It doesn't matter to us. So if people are being harmed because of that, then yes, we'd stand up for it.
Thank you.
The Green Party are obviously very, very pro-human rights, including obviously LGBT, nationally and internationally. There's a lot more that we can do. Internationally, sanctions I think are a good idea, and also foreign aid, things like Amnesty International. And when you talked earlier of taking £10 million out of foreign aid, I think, yeah, 10 billion, I couldn't quite believe my ears. £10 billion out of foreign aid. It's those kind of things that we need to absolutely not allow to happen. People around the world are suffering, and we need to make sure that we support them in whichever way we can, whether it be through national programmes from our country or supporting charities and NGOs that can do that work where perhaps politics doesn't reach.
Lib Dems fully support LGBT groups. It's incredibly important. Human nature, human life is very important. Whether it's male, female, young, old, black, white, small, tall, disabled, non-disabled, it's blessed. It should be protected. You should have your rights to do whatever you want, as long as it's legal. So yes, we fully support it.
Gentleman at the back, at the front here in the purple jumper has had his hand up a number of times.
Hello there, good evening. Something that hasn't been touched on. Question 11, tackling housing rent crisis. Since the Conservatives took over, we've seen a decline in housing benefits to vulnerable people. We've seen cutbacks left, right and centre, which is harming people. We've got 55,000 people being evicted from their homes simply because of the bedroom tax. I want to know what this panel is going to do about it.
Thank you. Blair?
Yeah, this is one where I am conflicted, because having spent my life working with young people, and obviously you'll know about the party wanting to withdraw housing benefit for young people. But looking at it from the other perspective, I think that the issue is that we have a benefit system which is pretty much out of control. In fact, just in terms of housing benefit, you're looking at 24 billion. So obviously, the challenge that I think the Conservative Party faces, and indeed probably whoever gets elected on the 7th of May, is how you fairly deal with getting that whopping bill, because the whole bill is considerably more than just housing benefit. How you get that under control. And interestingly enough, that since the welfare reform has come in, that we are seeing more people into work. Now the problem with all of this is that when you legislate in this sort of way, there are people who fall through the cracks. And I guess it's those people that we need to be very, very alert to. In Bournemouth, we've set up a welfare assistance fund, put over £1 million into that fund, so that we can make some response where we can see where there is an adverse effect on families locally. And a lot of councils up and down the country are doing the same. I think the government are talking about exemptions, and I think, certainly when I was director of the YMCA, we operated under exemption, so that those people who were genuinely in need, I'm talking particularly about young people, were actually protected. So we have to watch this one very carefully. I think the principle of getting people back to work, of more apprenticeships, of all of that is a good thing, but at the same time we need to watch the adverse effect on the most vulnerable.
What I quite enjoyed about, I'm just going to talk about the management tax for a second, then I'll talk about the bedroom tax. What I quite enjoyed about it was when the press were coming out against it, and the Conservative Party as well, saying, oh, you're going to force all these old ladies to move out of their £1.5 million property, etc., things like that, and then move to a smaller thing. You know, no one gave a shit about the kind of the single mum who had to move out, you know, with the 2 kids into an even worse property that wasn't properly rent controlled, etc., and things like that. Labour will repeal the bedroom tax the moment it gets into power straight away, and you know, building 200,000 homes by 2020 as well to try and do something about this huge increase in not only rents but also, you know, buying houses as well. They'll also put control on the letting agents' fees, which are also absolutely ridiculous for anyone who rents and has to kind of change every 6 months or a year. There's also going to be talk about putting a 2-year term limit on certain properties as well, so you can have a decent contract and not have to worry about, say, moving your kids to another school after your landlord kind of screws you over in that sense. So there are going to be real big changes in that.
Just before Martin, you say anything, John, could you just try and open the window at the back there? It's getting very warm, I think, in here. Thank you. Martin, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Fundamentally, this is a macroeconomic issue about the increasing cost of housing and rents. It's a supply and demand issue. If you don't build more houses and you have a lot of people coming into the country, homes are going to get more expensive, particularly if you let the sort of what we call the BTL market run riot and buy up all the starter homes. The biggest sort of elephant in the room when we're talking about housing and rent costs that no one ever mentions is the increase in population, which is primarily down to immigration, open door immigration to the rest of the EU over the last 8 years. We've got somewhere north of 4.5 million people extra who've come into the country. That is just, as I've said, simple economics. It's supply and demand. If there are fewer people in the country, the cost of housing will get cheaper.
I'm going to just answer your question directly. We will abolish bedroom tax if we were to be into power. And also we want to bring back empty homes into use, cap rent, as Kim said as well, introduce longer tenancies to protect renters, build 500,000 new social rented homes. All of this, I was talking about shelter earlier, only 20 affordable homes were built in Bournemouth during 2014. That's definitely not enough. We need to do something about that. So we need to build more homes, abolish bedroom tax, bring back empty homes into use, but we do need to be careful about Greenbelt and make sure that we're building responsibly and environmentally sustainably as well.
We need to better utilise the resources we have to begin with. I wrote a paper for my party last year and I identified there are 700,000 empty properties in the UK at the moment. 300,000 of those properties have been empty for more than 6 months. And my proposal that I put forward was that each local authority is given an allocation of money from the government. They will identify all empty vacant properties in the area. They will then have 2 or 3 Is it too close? They will. Okay, they will then send estate agents around to value these properties. Now these properties have been empty for a long time. They're sitting there, they're ugly, they're unpleasant, they're not conducive to local society. So they will be valued pretty low. They will then, I would then suggest they should be bought compulsory purchase. They could then bring builders in to actually renovate and do them up. They could also get apprentices to be taken on to work and shadow with the builders to learn a trade. They would then, my proposal is, that either join the housing stock or they should be sold privately, and then the money that's earned through there can be reinvested to buying more, so it can become self-proportionate. It just keeps on going on and on and on. We need to bring these empty properties back into use. By doing that, you will significantly improve the local communities. For instance, empty properties encourage and entice vagrants. They encourage and become drug dens, and they are inundated with rats and other rodents. By bringing them back into use, you will significantly improve the local community.
Okay, thank you. Ken.
Just a yes/no question. Answer, please. Would each candidate please say whether they will be demanding an immediate creation of a secure, permanent, independent Palestinian state?
Okay, yes, he's asked for yes/no questions, yes/no answers on that, please, because we don't want to get into a massive debate on Palestine at this time of night.
My answer would be no to that.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Definitely yes.
Fantastic. They're very obedient, aren't they? We've got time for a few more of those. We're nearly out of time, Aaron.
Well, I was very pleased that we had a full house on the PR vote, so I presume you will all be championing your parties to get that changed, whoever gets in power, so we'll consider that a done deal. You all agreed. Yes, so mine's on connection with the housing and immigration, so I'm going to use the immigration word. There were 76,000 people, I think, moved into Dorset, the whole county of Dorset, since the last census, and 1,079 houses built to accommodate that many. And there are loads of houses on Rightmove, but nobody can afford to rent them. My question is, immigration. As you know, we've got currently tens of thousands of people coming into the country, as that's what we were told. But can you give me a figure number of what your cap you think is a reasonable cap for immigration, whether it's 50,000, a million, the rest of the world?
Okay, each of the candidates, you've now got 30 seconds, please, just to give us your cap figure.
I would be totally ill-equipped to give you a figure on that, because the bottom line is I don't know of a figure. But what I do know is that the issue, sorry, I'm getting not in the yes no bit, but the issue basically is that, for example, if we don't have appropriate immigration of skills, then the NHS for one institution would come to a grinding halt. But what we do need to put to control is people coming into the country who are not adding to the country, people who are unemployed, people who are adding to the housing problem, but we need to balance that up with people who will contribute to the life of our Great Britain.
I wouldn't say, I wouldn't put a number on it. I'd just say, again, for what value they can offer to society, which again is a very hard thing for an immigration officer to decide there and then how much value someone can offer. I think obviously with EU we pretty much have an unlimited one anyway, so we haven't seen everyone from the EU come in, and we have seen a lot of Brits go abroad as well. So yeah, I wouldn't give you a number.
Martin.
Well, you can tell there's an election coming up, can't you? Everyone's talking about immigration and talking tough on it for a change. But as Kim quite rightly said, when we are a member of the European Union, we have no controls over it. We have a completely open door to almost 500 million people who can come here. Now, historically, over the last 20 or 30 years, before the Ascension 8 countries joined.
Martin, would you have a cap? We're running out of time.
I wouldn't have a cap. I would suggest a number of somewhere between 20 and 50,000.
A week.
Instead of on a daily basis, I think you'd have to say that annually.
I'll be succinct. No cap. I don't know about figures, things like that. But what I will say is immigrants have shown to bring in more money than they take out of our system. Just food for thought.
Thank you.
I would echo the Greens.
Thank you. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that if you've had your hand up and I haven't spotted you, I do apologise, but do hang around and linger. This is the most exciting part of the evening now. What we're going to do now is have a public vote. You don't have to take part if you don't want to, but it would just be interesting to have a quick show of hands. who you're planning to vote for as a result of what you've heard this evening. But the important thing is to make sure that you voted on your voting slip and make sure you put that in the black box just by the door. We'll count it as quickly as we can and we'll have a result as soon as we can as well. So let's just take them from right to left. Could I please have a show of hands, those of you who would like to vote Conservative? Okay, thank you very much. A show of hands, those of you who would like to vote Labour. Okay, we're not going to count, but that's a good showing. A show of hands for UKIP, please. Okay, that's interesting. A show of hands for Greens. Thank you. And a show of hands for Lib Dems. Right, okay, that's a very interesting result, ladies and gentlemen. It's too close to call, but we do know that the Conservatives are not going to get in this room. But thank you very much, Blair. Yeah. Okay, will you please give another big round of applause to our 5 panelists? I think we're igniting election fever tonight, so thank you very much for coming. And do make sure you come to our future events, pick up a programme as you go, pop a couple of quid in the box, and see you soon. Thank you.